Noemi, you're muted.
Okay, I'm muted. Hold on. Okay, can you hear me now?
You're fine. Noemi is the one who's muted.
Oh, wait, okay.
I'm muted. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I am Noemi Herzig, the Director of Jewish Cultural Arts and Education at the JCC in Ann Arbor. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this 34th Ann Arbor Jewish Book Festival. We have many sponsors and donors who have financially helped us support the festival, and we thank them all very much for their generosity. I can't thank my committee members enough for their hard work, dedication, and enthusiasm. This festival has had the most diverse selection of authors and books. Today is our final day featuring the last two authors. And now to some housekeeping matters. We are recording this session. If you choose not to be seen, please go to the little video camera symbol on the bottom left of your screen and turn the camera off by clicking on it. I suggest you choose the speaker's view on the right top corner to have a better view of the speaker. Please stay muted to keep the noise level down. I encourage you to post your questions and comments on chat. And now it is my pleasure to welcome committee member Rachel Newman to introduce our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Noemi. I feel like I'm being all fangirl, getting this local celebrity here. So Sandor Slomovits, along with his brother Laszlo, is a founding member of the popular folk music duo Gemini. The twin brothers have been writing, playing, and recording music since 1973, and from their home base in Ann Arbor have toured throughout the US and Canada. Their recordings have won many awards, including the National Library from the National Library Association, the National Parenting Publications, and the Wolf Trap Institute for Early Learning Through the Arts. Sandor is also a writer, having freelanced for a number of local newspapers and magazines, including the Ann Arbor Observer and the Washtenaw Jewish News. So please take it away.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Naomi. Some of the broadcast so far has been breaking up a little bit, so we'll just go forward assuming that everything is working. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and now let me introduce our guest today. Louis Kemp was born in Duluth, Minnesota, and shortly before graduating college, he left school to take over his father's Lake Superior fish business, gradually expanding it into Alaska and making it one of the most successful seafood operations in the United States. An ancillary enterprise, the Louis Kemp Seafood Company, helped create the thriving market for imitation king crab in the United States. This is where we get to today's topic. Louis Kemp became Dylan's best friend when they met at Herzl Summer Camp in the summer of 1953. In 1954, Kemp witnessed what he considers Dylan's first public performance when he played Hank Ballard's Annie Had a Baby at the camp's talent night. In 1975, Louis produced Dylan's legendary Rolling Thunder Revue tours and traveled with him all over the world as a trusted ally and friend for many years. Louis is a respected and devout member of the Jewish community. He is the father of Aish HaTorah's Discovery Program, attended by more than 500,000 people worldwide. And he's also the founder of Chabad of Pacific Palisades, California. But perhaps most meaningful to him are his 6 children and 5 grandchildren and counting. So welcome, Louis Kemp.
Now it's 7 and 1 in the
It's
cooker.
7. Mazel tov. Mazel tov. Thank you so much for joining us today, Louis. It's a treat to see you in person, even at this great distance. You are in Jerusalem right now, and we were talking about the weather is approximately the same in Jerusalem right now as in Ann Arbor. Wonderful to see you, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation about the book you've written about Bob Dylan. So let's start with the fact that in 1953, you were 11 years old, and Bobby Dylan, at that point, Bobby Zimmerman was 11. Tell us about some of your early memories that you write about in your book.
So this camp that we met at, called Herzl Camp, it's a co-educational camp in northern Wisconsin. It's still thriving. Most of the kids, come from the Twin Cities. I'm from Duluth. Bobby is from Duluth, but there was kids that came from Kansas City and Omaha as well. And it was a Zionist camp. We had kosher food. We wore Shabbos whites. It was a great summer experience for us. And of course, for the guys and the girls too, it was great because it was co-educational, right? So we had our summer romances, and that kept us coming back.
Mm-hmm.
But Bobby and I were in the same cabin that first year. He came to camp with his guitar at 12 years old, and he would tell everybody he's going to be a rock and roll star. And he said it so many times, I believed him. I mean, he had a determination at that young age that was, overwhelming. Of course, he went way beyond becoming a rock and roll star. The amount of awards, including the Nobel Prize in Literature,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard to believe, for a singer-songwriter. He's the first singer-songwriter that ever got that honor.
Of course.
And, that's where it started. It started at Herzl Camp.
What was really interesting to me is what you were talking about, that even at that very early age, he knew exactly what he wanted, and he was already starting to practice to move in that direction. And here he is now, past the age of 80, and he's still out on the road, still playing. I saw him, I think 2.5 years ago. He came through Ann Arbor, and I saw him here at that time. And that's pretty remarkable that he knew at that early age, and then has kept that going throughout all this time. So I
And
know
he's still writing new songs and putting out.
absolutely. He released a recording just this year, a brand new recording just this year.
Yes.
So you talk about hearing him play music at the camp, and that you heard his possibly first public performance over there. What's interesting about your book to me is that, in a sense, it's not really about Bob Dylan as a musician. It's much more about Bobby Zimmerman, and you're one of the very few people, I think, in the world who can call him Bobby. It's your friendship. It's the times that you spent together. So it's not an analysis of Dylan's music. There are many books about that out there already. That this is truly a unique relationship, because people that famous, that prominent, as you write in the book, people want something from them all the time. People meet them and want to either get work from them, or money, or some association. But to have a friend who doesn't want any of those things.
Or ask him stupid questions. What does this song mean? And what does that song mean?
Exactly. And that has never been your relationship. It wasn't that way when you were 12, and it hasn't been that way now. So talk a little bit about that aspect of it, that it's the times you spent together.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify what you said. My friend has never been Bob Dylan. It's always been Bobby Zimmerman. And
Right.
And that's why we were able to maintain a 50-year relationship, because if I would have become a fan of Bob Dylan, we couldn't have had this relationship, because there's a big difference between friendship of two people who start off at 11 years old and maintain that type of relationship, and people who become a fan. Once you become a fan, you're not objective anymore. You can't criticize. You can't say I don't agree with that. You can't say you're full of shit. Because fans don't talk like that. Fans are in awe. And so we have a normal relationship like any of you would have with any of your friends, and that's why we were able to to maintain it. And I didn't need anything from him. He didn't need anything from me. We both had our own careers.
Sure.
Everybody knows what his is, and I had my own success in the fish business. So it worked,
Yeah, and it's interesting to me that you mentioned music here and there about it, but the whole book is about your relationship other than about the music, even though, of course, you were very prominently involved in his music because you helped him to run a tour. You were with him on several other tours, even if you weren't in charge of a tour. So you were spending a lot of time with him when he was doing his work, which is, of course, to play music. I was
There was a friend. I wasn't there,
right.
Except for the 2 tours that I produced for him, the Rolling Thunder tours, which turned out to be legendary tours.
Absolutely.
And even then, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't about the music. I was the businessman, on those
Right.
tours. I organized them and made them happen. When he asked me to produce those tours, he said to me, I want you to produce these tours. I'll take care of the show. You take care of everything else. And that's how it went down.
Right. But of course, it was incredibly helpful to have, in fact, a successful businessman who could do some of those things, because you wound up negotiating with the president of Columbia Records to support Dylan's tour. And I'm not sure that a friend who was not a successful businessman could have managed that. Now, can you talk a little about that? You describe it beautifully in the book.
Thank you. Well, that was interesting. We were in New York getting ready to go on the road with Rolling Thunder. And, they were doing rehearsals and all this and that. So, and when we started out the tour, it was just going to be a tour. Then Bobby said to me about a month later, he said, I want to shoot a movie during the tour. Okay, he says, can you organize that? I said, yeah, we can put that together. Well, we were able to put it together, but it costs money to put a movie together, during the tour. We'll hire a lot more people, a lot more logistics, a lot more expenses. So one day I said to Bob, I said, I think I'm going to go over to Columbia Records and ask them if they'll contribute some money to support the tour, because they're going to sell a lot of records, off this tour. It's normal when a popular singer goes on the road, the record sales go up in those areas and beyond. So I said, they're going to do well. Let me see if I can get any money from them to support the tour. He said, well, I don't know if they do that, but that's what you want to do, go do it. So I got a hold of it, the lady that managed his office, and she did all his publishing. She had the direct relationship with Columbia, who was his record company. And I told her what I was going to do. She said, oh, don't bother. She said, I've tried to get money from Columbia before. They won't do it. I said, well, I'm willing to try. I said, I didn't even know who the name of the president of Columbia Records was. And that's one of the pluses, because I wasn't in the business. I didn't have the baggage of having to kiss anybody's ass. I came at it strictly as Bob's friend. I wasn't representing 10 other people, so I couldn't play hardball with Columbia, because if I did, they'd take it out on somebody else I represented.
Right. So
I didn't have that baggage. So finally she gave me the name and the number. His name was Walter Yetnikoff. Nice Jewish boy, but he was a tough guy. And he was the president of Columbia Records, which is the biggest record company in the world. And he was a powerful dude in that industry. So I called the number. His assistant answers the phone. I said, my name's Louie Kemp. I'm a friend of Bob Dylan's. He's planning a tour that's going to go out on the road here very shortly. And I wanted to come up and see Walter to see if we could work out the logistics between Bob and the tour and Columbia. She said, well, let me tell Walter what your request is, and I'll get back to you. She called me back 20 minutes later and said, Mr. Yetnikoff would be very pleased to meet with you. Okay. She said, when do you want to come? I said, I'll come tomorrow. So I went over to Columbia, and I got there, and she brought me in and introduced me to Mr. Yetnikoff. And he said, I'm so excited. Bob's got a new album with us that's going to come out shortly. His last album, one of the tracks was amazing. And now he's got this new tour. He's so active, and it's just wonderful for him and for us. I said, yeah, well, that's why I'm here. I wanted to talk to you about the tour. So I explained to him this tour wasn't a traditional tour. We were going to play out of the way places. That was Bob's idea. He wanted to play small, go to places where he wouldn't normally go, universities, small towns, and play in front of 2,000-3,000 people. His last tour, a year and a half before, was in front of 20,000-30,000 people.
Right.
Private jets and limousines and all that, stuff. And he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to go right to the people, and so that they could get good seats in places that they would never have the opportunity. And I explained that all to the Ethnicon. And then I said, and even we're not announcing the tour dates ahead of time. We're going to break the dates 2-3 days ahead of time. We have a crew that's going to go out and hand out handbills in the city 2-3 days ahead of time and tell them, what's going on, who's coming to town, and where they can buy tickets.
This is 1974. You could do that.
We didn't spend 1 cent on advertising. We'd go to these towns, we'd break the concerts, the local radio station would pick up on it, everybody would know about it quickly, and they'd all sell out immediately. And he said, well, that's great, that's amazing, nobody's ever done that. So excited that he's breaking ground in so many ways, blah blah blah. And then he says to me, so we're going to need to get the itinerary, and we're going to need to get tickets for all the concerts so we can give them to the record stores and the DJs. That's how they did it back then. Everything was done like that. And I said, well, that's fine. I said, but there's one thing, Walter. We're going to, this tour is unusual, and we're going to need some support from Columbia, to help make it work financially. He said, well, we don't do that. I said, well, really? I said, well, that's too bad, because if you're not going to show your financial support for Bob in this groundbreaking tour, then I can't cooperate with you. I'm not going to give you any tickets to any of the shows. I'm not even going to tell you where the shows are ahead of time. And if you want to buy some tickets on the street, you could try and buy them. Good luck to you. And I turned around. I turned around and started walking to the door, hoping he was going to stop me, of course. And sure enough, he did. I got halfway to the door, and he said, "Okay, stop, come back." I had asked him for $100,000. Well, $100,000 in 1975 is like $500,000 now. It was real money.
That's right.
You could buy a beautiful house in a beautiful neighborhood for $100,000 in 1975. And at first he said, "No, we're not going to do that." Well, then when he called me back, he said, "Okay, we'll give you the $100,000, but we need to have tickets and we need to have access." I said, "Okay, you'll get access." I says, "Be sure to have the check delivered to Bob's office tomorrow morning." He said, "It will be there," and it was.
And it was.
And,
it's as I said, you were a friend of his, but the fact that you were a friend who had experience in big business and was successful at that made you a special friend in that way also. I was what we said before about the book isn't about the music, it's about the friendship, but it's filled with so many stories of what the book did for me was humanize Bob Dylan. And what I mean by that is, I'm a musician, and for me, Bob Dylan was the source. I've said this before, that if it wasn't for Bob Dylan and the Beatles, I wouldn't have gone into music. Those were the people that I looked to imitate and so on. But I don't know these people at all. All I know is their music. And that's true of all of us, that, you read little bits here and there and so on. And your book talks about these moments where Bob Dylan is being Bob Dylan. He's not being the music star. He's being a guy who
He's being Bobby Zimmerman, is what he's being.
he's being Bobby Zimmerman. He's a guy who maybe one night has a few too many drinks and he gets a little rambunctious at a theater, or he wants to drive the tour bus for a while when he's really not in shape to do that. But he also is, he's the guy who is the best man at your wedding. It's you don't think of Bob Dylan as somebody's best man, so it's those were the stories, and not only about Bob but about the people around Bob. So you tell this hilarious story of Bob Dylan listening to Joni Mitchell try out some new songs and falling asleep in her living room. I mean, talk about some of those kind of experiences that you shared with Bob Dylan.
With Bobby Zimmerman.
Bobby Zimmerman.
That's who he is. When he's on stage, he's Bob Dylan. When he's
That's right.
hanging with his friends or family, he's Bobby Zimmerman. But most people don't get to see that. And this book gives positive stories behind the scenes about who he really is. When he's not performing. So there's a lot of interesting anecdotes like that in the book. One of the stories that a lot of people enjoy is the time that I took Bobby, his wife Sarah, and Marlon Brando to a Seder.
Right.
In
Los Angeles.
Yeah, at a Reform synagogue in the Hollywood Hills.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in LA, doing Passover, and at that time, now I'm observant, but at that time, I consider myself conservative. I grew up conservative, and I'd always, our family always had a Seder. So if I wasn't in Minnesota with my family, I'd look for, Seder, somebody's house. So in this case, I was able to find a public Seder at a synagogue in Hollywood, and I was going to go with my sister, and through a whole other set of circumstances, I had become personal friends with Marlon Brando, independent of Bob. And I explained that in the book. And because his son came to work for me in Alaska. Mm-hmm. That's how that came about. That's the short version. So Marlon knew I was in town. He called me up and he said, "Louie, do you want to go out to dinner tonight?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to, Marlon, but tonight is the beginning of Passover and I'm going to a Seder." And he got so excited. "A Seder, I've always wanted to go to a Seder." Mm-hmm. He said, "Can I come with?" I said, "Well, if you really want to." He said, "Oh, I want to." I said, "Okay." This was 2 years after the movie The Godfather came out. So mm-hmm. You can't turn The Godfather down,
Right.
So I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm leaving." I was staying at the Beverly Wilshire. I said, "Come to the Wilshire." I can't remember exactly what time, maybe 6 o'clock, and we'll go over together. So he said, "Okay." Then shortly, Bob called me and said, "We want to get together tonight." I said, "Well, tonight, Bob, is the beginning of Passover." So, "Oh, I forgot." He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to this public Seder at a shul and temple in Hollywood." He said, "Well, can Sarah and I come?" I said, "Sure." So they came, and we had it ended up to be a whole group. Marvin calls back and says, "Can he bring a friend?" He brings a friend. We ended up with maybe 15 people. And it was like being in a Fellini movie. It's quite amazing. There was 300 people at the Seder. And first they had no idea who was at our table, but they figured it out. The rabbi figured it out. At some point he said, during the reading of the Haggadah, he says, "Mr. Brando, will you do us the honor of reading the next passage from the Haggadah?" And Marlon says, "I'd be pleased." And he stands up and reads the passage as if he was on Broadway doing Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. And everybody was shocked. First of all, they were shocked once they realized Marlon Brando was there. And then, when he was done, everybody clapped, and then shortly thereafter, the rabbi pulls out an acoustic guitar. He was up on the stage, the rabbi was on stage, and all the tables were on the floor. And so he was looking down on everybody. So he had a good bird's eye view. He pulls out an acoustic guitar and says, "Mr. Dillon, would you do us the honor of singing a song?" Well, I knew he wouldn't do it. I mean, he doesn't, when he's on his own time, he doesn't like to do anything like that. So I leaned over, I was about to say to him, "You want me to handle this?" And before I could say that, he stands up and walks to the stage. I was shocked. And he takes the acoustic guitar and actually sings "Blowing in the Wind." It was surreal.
Mhm.
And, of course, everybody was blown away, and that's how that evening went. And at the end of the evening, all 300 people came over to our table and shook hands with Marlon and Bob. They were very gracious, and it was a night to remember. And there's more detail in the book about that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little about that. Sometime in the 80s, early 80s, Dylan started becoming very interested in Christianity and started studying Christianity. And right around the same time, you were getting more involved with Judaism. And then you sort of brought him into perhaps a greater connection with Judaism at that time as well. Can you tell us a little about that aspect of your friendship?
Yes. So what happened was Bob, the main house is in Malibu, and that's like an hour from the city. So when he come into the city, it'd be an hour each way. So he rented a house in Brentwood so that he wouldn't have to go back, to Malibu all the time and do all that extra driving. So he said to me, I rented this house in Brentwood. I was renting a condo in Westwood. He said, and he'd come visit me. He said, "You don't need this place." He says, "Come stay with me." So I did. I moved in with him. And we lived together for 3 years. But that was the time that he was going through this experience with Christianity. He had a friend, a lady friend who he was, divorced at the time, who was a Christian, who was studying the New Testament, and she invited him to come to a Bible class. So he said, "Oh, I'll check it out." So long story short is he goes to the Bible class, and like every human being and every Jew, the neshama is always crying out for some spirituality, no matter what your religious habits are. And there's the body, and then there's the neshama. The body wants to be comfortable, and the neshama wants some spiritual fulfillment. Different for everybody. And anyway, so when he went to this class and he started reading the New Testament, it filled some kind of a need of his. So, and he was doing that, very diligently. He went to these classes for 3 months straight, and then he would study at the house afterwards. So while we were living together when this was unfolding, I took a trip back to Minnesota to see my mom, and I met Rabbi Manas Friedman. Manas Friedman is a very well-known Chabad teacher and rabbi and lecturer. And he, just as a side note, he has 150,000 subscribers on YouTube for his lectures. He's amazing. He's probably the most prominent Jewish lecturer that there is. And I met him. I spent time with him. I told him the best way to describe the time we spent together, the initial meeting, was I had good questions, but he had great answers. Every one of his answers blew me away. There were things I'd never heard before. The meaning of life, how can I start paying God back for all the good fortune I had, stuff like that. And nobody else had any answers for it. If I'd asked my friends, they say, we don't know anybody, anything. We worked hard. We deserve all this. I knew that wasn't right. That didn't sit right with me. I knew that I was being blessed by God. And I knew I was running up a tab. And I told him that I said, I'm writing up this tab. How do I start making payments on it? So,
Very good.
yeah, that's what I said to him. And so he said, well, I'm holding session right now. He still has it, this school called Base Hana. And if you want to come and study there with me, at night, I'll answer your personal questions and study Torah in the daytime. So when I went there, I was shocked. I walked in the room. There was 50 people in the room. They all had their backs to me. And after a while, I realized it was all women. So my friend Larry, who actually introduced me to him, was there with me. I said, Larry, it's all women in this class. He said, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. That's his specialty. He only teaches women. He says, you're the first guy I ever invited. Oh my God. I was going to stay 3 days. I stayed 3 weeks. And anyway, it had an effect on me. So when the 3 weeks was over, and I was sitting with him at night, he said to me, he said, if you look in the mirror, you may think you're the same person, but after having studied for the last 3 weeks, inside you have to be different. I said,
Right.
you're right. He said, so what are you going to do about it? I said, well, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. So he says to me, there's 613 commandments. As I always said, stop. You gotta know who you're talking to. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota.
Yeah.
You know, I have no Jewish formal education, you know, and there's no way I'm gonna do 613 commandments. I said, the only reason I know about the 10 commandments is because of the movie. I can't even do all those. And so he just sat there for about a minute, stroking his beard, didn't say anything, it was kind of eerie. And then he says to me, well, there's 5 commandments. If you do these 5 commandments, you'll start to pay back that tab that you told me that you knew you were running up, which you have. I said, okay, well, what's that? So he explains to me 5 commandments. And then he gets done saying what they are. He explains what each one was on a spiritual level, a mystical level, a practical level. He really laid it out for me. Then I sat there for about 30 seconds pondering what I just heard. And he says, so what are you going to do? So I just sat there and thought about it. So after 30 seconds, I said to him, okay, I'm going to do it. He said, when do you want to start? I said, right now.
Yeah.
So it was already about 10 o'clock at night. We're at the Chabad house in St. Paul, Minnesota. He said, come back here at 10 in the morning and I'll get you set up. So I came back there. He had tefillin for me. He had tzitzis for me. He had, you know, books about how to keep kosher, how to keep Shabbos. You know, I walked out there like this, you know, and that was it. At cold turkey, I started becoming an observer. And then when I went back to the house in Brentwood, it was really interesting. Bobby's in one part of the house studying the New Testament. I'm in another part of the house studying the Torah. And we'd meet in the kitchen, you know, sometime during the day, and you know, we'd eat and drink together. That was our ritual. And you know, we talked to each other about what we were studying, you know, and he tried to, you know, tell me about the virtues of what he was studying. I tell him about the virtues of what I was studying. But he had been doing it for a lot longer than me. So he was throwing all kinds of stuff at me that I didn't know how to refute. So after one of these sessions, I went in another room and I called Rabbi Friedman. I said, Rabbi, my good friend who I'm living with, a Jewish guy, is studying the New Testament. I didn't tell him who my friend was. And I really don't have the depth of knowledge to refute, you know, the things he's telling me. I said, if I fly you out here, will you meet with him? Sure, if you want me to. So the next day I said to Rabbi, I said, my rabbi is going to be here next week. Would you like to meet with him? He said, sure, bring him over to the house. So I called Rabbi Friedman. I said, okay, how's next Tuesday? I'll get you a ticket. He said, sure. So I picked him up at the airport. I brought him to the house. and they got along very well.
Mhm.
And that was the beginning of the process by which, I introduced him to a lot of other rabbis and introduced him to a lot of cool Jewish guys that were observant, that he could relate to. And it took a while, but then he started to study Torah, and he came back to the
It-
way of his ancestors.
It's really interesting because, of course, again, maybe only an old and trusted friend could do something like that. Again, if it was somebody who maybe he didn't know as well or as long, you sort of question whether why is this person doing this? But he had known you long enough to know that there couldn't be an ulterior motive or some nefarious thing going on.
Well, I put my money where my mouth was. I was living a Torah life,
Exactly.
and I, I had the chutzpah, because it wasn't Bob Dylan for me, it was Bobby Zimmerman, to tell him what I thought,
Sure.
why and when and everything, and he respected that and listened to me.
Yeah. There are wonderful little scenes in the book. You're going to the Super Bowl with your son, with Bobby, and with his son Jacob.
Yes.
Just the picture of Bob Dylan on the 50-yard line watching the Super Bowl. You don't think of that, and there's that. Or here's one of my favorite scenes: you getting into a food fight with Joan Baez in a restaurant. This isn't Bobby. This is just you. It's very human. Tell us about how that came about.
Okay, so what happened was when Rolling Thunder, there was 2 Rolling Thunder tours, 1 and 2.
Right.
So when Rolling Thunder 1 was over, last concert was at Madison Square Garden. There was a benefit for Hurricane Carter.
Right.
The song Hurricane, was a result of his support for Hurricane. And so it was over. We were all staying at the hotel, and I started to pack to go back to Duluth. It was in December. So, people were saying, geez, we don't want this tour to end. It's so much fun. We don't want to go home. I said, well, I got to go back because I got a fish business that's going to be in season here. And I got to go back. So I said, but you know what? If you guys want to come with me to Duluth, they have a great ski resort there called Spirit Mountain, and they have all kinds of chalets there. We could get chalets for everybody, and we could ski for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And Joan says, "Oh, that sounds great. I want to come." Bob says, "Okay, I'll come." We must have about 15 people from the tour that came to Duluth in December and skied at Spirit Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, it was, that shows you how down home, these people were. So one of the nights that we were at Spirit Mountain, I invited everybody to come to a popular Chinese restaurant downtown Duluth called the Chinese Lantern, which I used to go to a lot of people did, and I invited my mother to come, and a few of my friends and the ladies and guys from the tour. And so we're sitting in the middle of the Chinese Lantern. It's full, and Joan is seated right behind me. Joan is very playful, as serious as she could be as one of the founders of Amnesty International. She's also had a very playful side and prankster side. Bob's there with Sarah and Roger McGuinn from the Birds. A lot of people were there at our table. And I can't remember what triggered it, but all of a sudden, Joan and I started throwing food at each other. And I know Bob would have entered in if Sarah hadn't been there. But with Sarah there, he wasn't going to do that.
Somebody had to play the grown-up.
Because she was a very proper race. She would have not appreciated Bob getting into a food fight, But so he just kind of sat there with a smirk, laughing, and Joan and I were letting it fly. My poor mother, Frida Kemp, who was sitting on my right side, and she had a bunch of friends there, and she was like, the queen bee, her friends were waving at her, there she was with Bob Dylan,
Right.
Joan Baez, it was big, ichus, and all of a sudden her son is in a food fight, and she was like
Mortified.
mortified, petrified, and she goes, "Louie, stop that! Louie, stop that!" And after a while, Joe and I made a truce, and we stopped it. But it was an interesting and fun experience.
I've seen Joan Baez in concert maybe 3 times, and I absolutely love her voice and I love her stage presence. Some of that, a little bit of that playfulness comes through even on stage, but nothing like that. And I hope I get to see her one more time, because somehow the picture of Joan Baez playing, and then I can also picture her in a food fight in a restaurant in Duluth. That'll be fun. Thank you for that. I want to keep track of the time, because I know what Naomi asked us to do is to talk for a while and then leave some time for questions. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close to that time. So let me ask you, is there something that we haven't talked about that you particularly would like to share, that we haven't touched on before we leave some time for questions?
Well, if it's all right with you, there's an excerpt from the book that
Of course.
people find interesting. And I'll just read that excerpt to everybody.
That'd be great.
Okay. So here's how it goes. This is directly from the book.
Okay.
It was Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, at the tail end of the 1980s. Bobby was attending services at the Chabad House in Santa Monica, California.
Mm-hmm.
Presiding was the Venerable Rabbi Avram Levitansky, beloved and revered by his congregation. We had been there before, and the rabbi recognized Bobby right away, but few, if any, of his fellow worshipers, all somberly dressed, realized he was standing at the back of the room. Having, as usual, missed the memo regarding the dress code, Bobby was wearing cowboy boots, torn jeans, a hoodie, a black leather jacket, and what looked like a long lost pair of Jackie Kennedy's sunglasses, the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, he was attending the Nila service. In Hebrew, Nila means closing the gate. As the day of Yom Kippur comes to a close and our future is being sealed, we turn to God to offer our repentance and new resolutions, and ask that he seal us in the book of life. We ask him to grant us a new year replete with goodness and happiness. The Nila ends with the blowing of the shofar, and the prayer that includes, next year may we be in
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, okay. And I happen to be there today, so that right this moment, so that's amazing. The ark housing the holy scrolls of the Torah remains open for the entire service, and is considered a great honor to be chosen by the rabbi to open it. This carries with it many blessings for the new year. The honor customarily goes to the temple's most generous donor, but not this time. With his ancient eyes, Rabbi Levitansky scoured the congregation. At last, his gaze came to rest upon a solitary figure standing in the back of the room. He motioned the casually dressed fellow up to the pulpit, and up he came. Bob Dylan opened the ark on Yom Kippur.
Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, when the last echo of the shofar had diminished to silence, and most of the congregants had trickled away, the biggest donor to the temple sought out Rabbi Levitansky and pulled him aside. I want you to know, Rabbi, said the man, that when you didn't call me up to open the ark, I was quite hurt. Then I saw whom you chose, and I realized you were even wiser and kinder than I imagined. So I'm going to double my contribution for the coming year. It takes a great and generous heart to give the honor of opening the ark for Nila to a homeless Jew.
Yes, and the homeless Jew, of course, is our own Bobby Zimmerman.
The rabbi has long since passed away, taking his spiritual secrets with him. As for the donor, unless he reads it here, he still doesn't know that the homeless Jew is Bob Dylan.
Yeah, I love that story in the book. Yes, I'm glad you read that. That's great. Yes. Well, Noemi, should we leave a little time now for questions?
Sure, there are some questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to look at them or do you want me to read them?
Why don't you read the ones that would be the best for Louis to answer?
Okay, so one question, did Bob Zimmerman parents or family have any influence on his musical penchant? Where did he acquire the interest from?
No, I don't believe they did. Well, where he acquired the interest from was he used to stay up late at night. Well, he was born in Duluth like I was, but his family moved to Hibbing when he was young. So he would listen to radio stations from the South at night. You know, they carry far and near, you get much better transmission. So he'd listen to stations from Nashville, New Orleans, all these southern places, and they'd be playing, this was the beginning of rock and roll. So, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, jazz, all this stuff. And he had a musical inclination, and he educated himself, learned all these songs through that process. And then he just took it and ran with it.
And that's something, by the way, that Dylan has kept up to this day. He has a vast collection. At one point, I don't remember exactly when, but at one point, he literally bought the entire collection of the Smithsonian's folk music collection, and basically studied it. I mean, so he has been incredibly serious about this throughout his life.
Yes,
yeah.
Totally. He's very knowledgeable about all phases of all types of music.
That's right. Yeah.
So there are several questions about the religion, your religion, all that, and I think you told us enough. So there's a question, were you impacted by Bob's motorcycle accident? Did it influence his life outlook?
Well, he had a motorcycle accident, I think it was either late 66 or 67. He was 25, 26 years old. He was already a legend. He was like, they called him the Messiah, the prophet of the generation. People were going through his garbage trying to figure out, what he was really like. It was just crazy stuff. But he had this accident, and he was laid up for quite a while, and he had just gotten married, and he decided to devote himself to having a family, and he didn't perform for about 7 years. He did a couple one-offs. I think he went on Johnny Cash's TV show and did a few things like that, but he didn't go touring or anything like that. And so it definitely had an effect on him. I think, when you almost die, it puts you in contact with your mortality. I think in that respect, it had an effect on him.
If I could just add to that, that was also the period that he first started collaborating with the band, with the group with the people who would then accompany him on the tours for a number of years. It was musically a very, very fruitful time for him, and even though he wasn't out performing, he was writing a tremendous amount and collaborating with other musicians a lot.
You're right. Yeah, he was living up in Woodstock, and so
right.
was the band, and they were doing, a lot of those sessions later came out as bootleg. Right. Yeah.
How does Bob Dylan feel about your book? Did he read it and sign off on it before it was published?
Yeah, so I sent him a copy before it came out, a couple of months before it came out. And so the best way to put it is no news is good news. You know, if you had a problem with that, I would have heard about it. And these stories are all positive, true stories. So I knew he wouldn't have a problem with them, and he did.
One other question is, in the 80s and 90s, I grew up at a summer camp similar to Camp Herzl. Dylan's songs were sung frequently. What songs were part of daily life at Camp Herzl?
Well, we sang a lot of Jewish songs, but there was a recreation room called the Ulam that had a piano in it, and Bobby would go there and pound on the piano and sing Jerry Lee Lewis songs, Chuck Berry, you name it. This was when rock and roll was just emerging, and a lot of the kids, would gravitate around the piano while he would do this, and so there was rock and roll, and to the horror of administration. The rabbi didn't appreciate that, by the way, but they gave him some latitude, and he was doing that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'll just tell you that in 1956, Dylan, and this is in the book, so I'm quoting Louis here. In 1956, Dylan, who was at that time 15 years old, walked into a music shop in St. Paul and recorded 6 songs. And one of those songs was Bebop Alula. So that gives you a sense of what he was doing in those days.
That was the influences that he had in those early days. Huh?
Yep.
So I'm going to open it up to anybody that wants to ask a question. I will invite you to unmute yourself and ask any question. I'm going to remove the spotlight there. So does anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you, Louis, for all those wonderful anecdotes and your answers to the questions. I just wanted to bring to your attention a book that Temple Beth Emmet will be reading come January. It's about the Jewish theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel, called Thunder in the Soul. And I thought I'd bring it to your attention. And nobody will probably ever be able to answer this, but it seems like part of the title was borrowed from the tours, the early tours, and that Bob Dylan
Rolling
was.
Thunder.
Yeah. So thought I had to mention it.
Thank you, Stephen.
Anybody else has a question, a comment? Now is the time.
Maybe while we're waiting for any other questions, Louis, could you just tell us a little bit about why you are in Jerusalem right now and your life these days, and just a little bit about what's happening for you right now?
Yeah, so I've been trying to get here for about 14 months, and I had to change my reservation 5 times, because it was Israel was locked down for tourists, and then they finally opened it up November 1st. And the reason I wanted to, well, first of all, I love coming to Israel, but I have a son, a 19-year-old son, who's going to yeshiva in the Old City. So I wanted to time my tour, my trip here, when I could spend time with him. And so that's what I'm doing. In fact, when this is over shortly, I'm going to go over to the Old City and hang out with him and learn with him, and looking forward to that.
Judy, go ahead.
Well, a lot of fairly well-known people came out of Minneapolis and Hibbing and that general area, like Thomas Friedman and a number of others. Do you think the Minneapolis or Hibbing, that connection and the Herzl Camp connection had a big influence on any of this?
Oh, we used to say in northern Minnesota, if you can make it in northern Minnesota, you can make it anywhere. And some interesting people have come out there. And as a side note, the new U.S. ambassador to Israel, his name is Tom Knights. He's a Jewish boy from Duluth. And
Oh,
My
that,
grandparents spent some time there, and my mother bragged that she went to the hairdresser with Bobby Zimmerman's mother. So I mean, there's a lot of interconnection. It's not a
That's
big
good.
deal to me, but anyway, there's a lot of interconnection among a lot of Jewish families in that general
Yeah.
area.
6 degrees of separation.
yeah.
Right. Well, with Jewish people, I think it's only one or two.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Thank you, Judy. I see the other Judy, Judy Lex. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
I wonder what you're doing now. Are you just writing, or how do you spend your time now?
yeah, so I have 6 kids, 7 grandchildren, one in the cooker, and they're scattered around. And that's my main priority is spending time with them, still guiding my children to the extent that they'll let me, of course. They're older, but I'm able to influence them still. But my grandchildren, I can really influence, and I'm doing that. And it's a very fulfilling part of my life.
Tell us a little bit. Do you still see Bobby Zimmerman?
So Bobby and I are not in touch these days. And, the stories that I recount in the book are 50 years of adventures that we spent together. But it's not easy to be Bob Dylan. And so that's one of the things that people ask me about that. That's what I say.
Okay, well, this was a delightful hour. The book is wonderful with lots of tidbits and little vignettes and stories. So I encourage you all to pick up a copy. You can order it from Amazon or from our local bookstore, Literari. Thank you, Louis. Thank you, San, very much. Tonight is our last program from the book festival, and I encourage you all to come and attend. Tonight is Ira Rosen, and he's going to talk about his book, Ticking Clock, Behind the Scene at 60 Minutes. He's an Emmy Award-winning producer and worked with 60 Minutes, so it should be very interesting. I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much, and have a nice rest of the afternoon. And for you, good evening. Yes, good night.
Yes, shalom to everybody from
Shalom.
Jews.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.